before kind of coming on the stage, I was talking about the letter that Donald Trump wrote to Erdogan. And the letter says, I mean, people actually had to do a fact check to really figure out whether this could actually be a letter written by a head of state. I mean, whether it's from the Onion or something, like is it a spoof or something, that how can somebody write like this? Don't be a tough guy, don't be a fool. So that kind of diplomacy taking place at the head of state level. Now, in an earlier world, perhaps that would have defined the tone and tenor of a sovereign nation. But in today's globalized world, where there are a lot of independent actors who are also playing, but today the US and Turkey, in fact, have a $24 billion trade. And obviously, that trade is going to different segments within the US. So even as Donald Trump's, that letter kind of came to light, there would have been a lot of people who would have been cringing in terms of states perhaps cringing, in terms of cities perhaps cringing, which are getting a substantial chunk of their $24 billion in terms of what really is Donald Trump doing. So on the one hand, there is diplomacy at the sovereign level, and then there is paradiplomacy that is happening at the state level, and it's kind of percolating down now. Now, if you look at today's Punjab, does Punjab only want to do what the center is doing, or does Punjab also want to have its own relations? And if Punjab wants to have a certain tone and tenor to its relations, does it sync with what the center wants? And if it does not sync, then what happens? And if Punjab has a certain kind of an issue with a certain minority that is at a central level a minority, but is a majority or a very prominent section of the population in the state, and that particular section wants to have a certain level of trade relations with another country, how does it all align? How does it all gel? I was just talking with Ashika. For instance, there is a lot of pressure on Punjab that, along with the BSF and the army, that the border has to be secured by the state. So there is a certain amount of onus that is there also on the state. But along with it, does the state have the freedom to engage in trade relations with Pakistan? No, it does not. That goes to the center. And there are a lot of people in Amritsar on the bordering areas who say, if we open up trade, and if kind of the trade, instead of moving via the Mumbai, Middle East kind of Pakistan route, actually went across Wagah, perhaps Punjab would suddenly be much more prosperous. But can those decisions be taken? So yes, the world is changing. It's becoming a globalized world. Paradiplomacy is suddenly assuming a huge amount of significance. But are there challenges associated with it? For example, there was a challenge when the state of Tamil Nadu had put a lot of pressure on the then UPA government that you kind of vote against Sri Lanka, which was a friendly nation, and the UPA government did that. So that kind of pressure also operates. So while there is positive pressure that let's kind of improve trade relations, there can also be these kind of pressures. So I'll go straight across to a very, very experienced person, Mr. J.S. Mukul. You have kind of seen all of these things from close up and personal, really. So as you look at paradiplomacy, of course, there are a huge amount of advantages. There are a certain set of challenges. But when you see this whole trend happening, how do you predominantly define the flow? Where is it going? What is happening?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and delighted to be at ISB for the very first time. Now, coming straight to the subject, I think paradiplomacy has been there for a long time. It's just that it is getting known only now. And the type of things that we have seen in the past was limited to what we call twinning arrangements between states. In our system, the states are important. In some other countries, the cities are more important. So then we have twinning arrangements between cities. And I won't even give examples because there are actually dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of such arrangements between all the states, various cities. Recently, we heard of the Chennai Connect event about Chennai and proposal, that is for Chennai and Fujian, for example. But there are a large number of them. I was Consul General in Munich. Bavaria, the southern state, the economic powerhouse in Germany, is connected to Karnataka twinning arrangement. So that is there. That has traditionally been anchored in the Ministry of Urban Development, of course, in consultation with the Ministry of External Affairs. But it was limited to that. Really, paradiplomacy has come of age, so to say, has become important in the last 10 or 15 or maybe even 20 years. And there I'll first start with a few institutional things that the Ministry of External Affairs has done. A great innovation about 10 years or so ago was what we created a states division. Today it's called the Economic and States Division in the ministry. The purpose is to handhold the states in terms of economic and commercial interaction. You mentioned about trade, investments. The idea is that both for incoming and outgoing delegations, commercial delegations, trade flows, investment flows, tourism flows. So that was a major thing, and that has been doing well. Before that, also, you used to use the resident commissioners of states, but I mean, that was obviously not found to be the optimal. That also channel is used sometimes. The second thing which happened was we created a new Overseas Indian Affairs Ministry. Now it's part of the Ministry of External Affairs. This is on the diaspora side. Again, the same thing. Some states, for example, Kerala is one which comes to mind. They have very powerful institutions like NORCA looking after their diaspora, the Keralite diaspora, particularly in the Gulf. So this is a division which works very closely with them, both in terms of facilitation. These divisions do both facilitation, promotion, and the OIA also has the PGE, Protector General of Immigrants, which is a regulatory framework to protect the interests of our workers. There is a recent development, and that is still work in progress, is now that we are looking for branch secretariats of the MEA in major state capitals. We have them in five cities, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Guwahati. But I said this is work in progress. The idea is to bring all MEA institutions under one roof so that there's better coordination with the states. The twinning arrangement earlier was mainly focused on cultural, also economic, commercial, but now it's also the whole gamut of India's relations are being looked at. Some achievements or some things which have gone unnoticed, and I'll give you two examples there. A recent program is what is called of the ministry, a relatively recent program. In the last 5 years, this has come up, SAMEEP. SAMEEP stands for Students and MEA Exchange Program. The idea is that IFS officers, when they go back to their states or their cities, go to the alma mater, present to them India's foreign policy. It's more in terms of outreach and things like that. So this has been a very successful program. It takes nothing at all, and we all visit our alma mater and things like that. The other program is what is called the Videsh Aya Pradesh Ke Dwar. Again, Videsh Aya Pradesh Ke Dwar is another initiative of the ministry, very recent. The idea is to reach out because obviously in the national press there is reasonable, it could be better, but there's international news is covered reasonably well. But the vernacular and local media, this is an outreach to the vernacular and local media to take it again to the people in the states. What are the foreign policy issues? This is by way of outreach. A major innovation which happened a few years ago was that all IFS officers, Indian Foreign Service officers, of course we represent the country, but we were also assigned to a state. So, quote unquote, we are ambassadors. We are supposed to be also ambassadors of that state. And the idea is we keep going back to the state. And in my present assignment as the head of the training institute, they go there at various levels of training courses. They go there at the HOM's level, at the HOM's conference, and things like that. So the point I'm trying to make is, the short point of all this is that there's been a lot of outreach by the ministry to the states in recent years. We know that foreign policy is, strictly speaking, in the domain of the central government. But the central government has been reaching out, engaging states at different, whether it's SAMEEP, it's this vernacular press, Pradesh Aya, Videsh Ke Dwar, it's the quote-unquote IFS officers defined, or the other thing. The idea is to take on board all the views of the stakeholders. I mean, that's not to say that everything what a state says is going to be accepted, but certainly there is an engagement, there is an outreach, and I think this is an excellent example of what we call cooperative federalism in our system. Without naming countries, there are countries where, again, like India, foreign policy is strictly in the domain of the federal or the central government, and there are states which are actually agitating where the center says no, constitutionally, or the federal government says no, this is our domain. We, on the contrary, have, as part of this cooperative federalism, as part of the outreach, taken a large number of measures to reach out. And that's where I think paradiplomacy. When I say states, obviously, I'm not just talking at the state capital level. It percolates down. It percolates down to cities, because in our system, obviously, the states are important. The cities, Chandigarh may be an exception there, but really in some countries, the states are not so dominant. It's the cities, the mayors are important. We have tried to factor in all that, and really we have a flourishing bilateral relationship going there. So yes, paradiplomacy has been there, but it's gathered momentum, got salience in recent years, and I can only foresee that it will become even more important going forward. I'll stop here.
Mr. Bukul, interesting points that you made there. Paradiplomacy has always been there, and then, of course, it's not just the government that decide what needs to be done, because there are many other factors that are at play. The world is changing. There is a lot of pressure in terms of globalization. I mean, products are available all across the world. Raw materials are available. So corporates, there is a lot of pull demand as well. While there is a push from the government, there is a lot of pull demand as well. But as all of this is happening, just after the Modi government had come to power, for the first time when 150 heads of mission had a meeting in Delhi, so you had a state chief minister from Andhra Pradesh, you had a state chief minister from Gujarat come and address the heads of missions. So in a way, the center realizes that there is an importance to the states that has to be given. It has to kind of start happening. It is happening. Now, let me just kind of take you back to your previous session where there was, I believe, a certain amount of heat over soft power and what Indian diplomats abroad should be doing. So you made a very interesting point later on outside where you were saying that Singapore has 850 diplomats. India, which is a huge country, I mean, Singapore is a city-state, has 1,000 diplomats. The US and China are deploying 15,000 diplomats each. So there is a crisis of sorts in terms of the kind of capability of outreach that is there. The Indian Foreign Service is a highly trained organization, but is it being able to fulfill the requirement and the mandate that is there in a globalized world with a huge amount of pull and push demand in terms of really being able to do justice to all of this? So while you say that there are a number of initiatives that are being taken, is it a case of too little, may not be too late, but maybe too little at this point in time? Can something be done to address that kind of a gap that is there?
No, the fact that we are very thinly spread on the ground cannot be denied. We are only 1,000, given the kind of diplomatic footprint that we have, 190 embassies, consulates, high commissions across the world. I don't want to get into a comparative thing, but yes, at one level, we are definitely trying to address the shortage, the quantitative shortage, by increased intake in the foreign service. Now we are taking almost around 30 to 40, around 30 per year. In my times, it used to be very less, 15, 10, even some batches of 10. So that is being done. But having said that, I think it is important to understand two propositions very quickly. We all know that diplomats are not born, diplomats are made. And since diplomats are made, obviously training becomes important. And since training is important, and I dare say that Indian diplomacy, despite the shortage, has been making an impact globally. I think there is something, of course, right with the training, but more importantly, I think I wouldn't call it that it is a case of too little. We are, yes, our diplomats are under tremendous pressure, which is a fact, but I think the training factors that in. We really have been producing multitaskers. And really, if you look at it on the ground, the kind of outreach that India has been having, particularly in the last years, in recent times, I think our diplomacy has made an impact globally. Whether it is the diaspora outreach, whether it's in terms of economic commercial work, whether it's in terms of our cultural or soft diplomacy or cultural diplomacy, which was referred to in the last session, I think our diplomats have made an impact. And also one of the factors which was not this thing about branch secretariats of Videsh Bhavans being set up in states. Now, obviously, they also take up diplomats. The idea is, of course, to bring in all MEA, the regional passport offices, the Protector General of Immigrants, the trade and investment offices, the cultural offices under one roof. We have 5, but I think this is, as I said, work in progress. But going forward, we will see more of these coming in, particularly in the major capitals to start with, but later on, I guess, everywhere.
Falguni, from Mr. Bukul, I'll kind of come to you. You wrote a paper for the Observer Research Foundation where you kind of spoke about just after Donald Trump had come to power and his kind of anti-climate kind of initiatives were being unleashed. You had the governor of California. Is it working?
Please go on, sorry.
Okay, is it working? Okay, so you had the governor of California step in and say that, okay, we will kind of, if there is any slack that President kind of Trump introduces, we are going to fill up that slack. And if there are satellites which are kind of shut down, we will launch satellites. We have the engineers, we have the money, we have the lawyers. We will make sure that we continue with this whole concept that climate is changing. So a very adversarial kind of a position taken in terms of a diplomatic stand, maybe, if one could call that a diplomatic stand, and a paradiplomatic stand taken from here. On the other hand, when initially India kind of had this whole centralization of powers as per the constitution, where you had this threefold kind of separation of powers, and foreign affairs went to the center, and it was very clear that any foreign relation, any kind of a treaty agreement with a foreign power would have to be at the central level. It was all hunky-dory, all fine till the time that it was a Congress government which dominated the country. 1967 onwards, you had kind of the coalition politics start off, and that's where a certain amount of friction started off. So as you see all of this kind of move towards paradiplomacy happening, and then there is a constitution, there is this whole separation of powers. How do you see the way forward? How is this process going to be negotiated now? How much power will be given up? How much power will be sought? How much is needed? At the end of the day, you do not need to take decisions which are absolutely diplomatic decisions. You need to take decisions which are mostly economic decisions for the well-being of the state. So how do you see this kind of giving up or devolution of powers taking place? Is it going to be a smooth process? How much is needed, and when should it be happening?
Thank you for that question, Jyoti. So to start with, I think it's important to understand that in the Indian context, paradiplomacy is not about self-governance. It is about inclusion and letting the states go forward in order to hone their own competencies and their own capabilities. Then this comes down to the fact that in the Indian context, under the Indian Constitution, it's not the states who enjoy any power to conduct foreign policy at their own level. It is the nation state, so to say, which enjoys that power. And thus, it's very clear that in the Indian context, it always has to be a devolution of power. It is always the center which will have the power to decide or to make sure that this is the amount of power we want to give the states in order to conduct any foreign policy relations. The subnational entities, even if it's not the states, even if it's the cities, we have to understand that the international engagements of states has to always come from the center. Make no mistake about that. So, for example, the example that you quoted from my paper that I wrote, I don't see that happening in the Indian context. We do not foresee that happening where the Indian PM or the president goes out of the country and makes a certain comment, and then you have a state CM or perhaps a bureaucrat who goes out and says, no, we are willing to do it. Come on in and make this happen with our state. That can't happen in the Indian context. Even if there are problems that we might face on the international front.
That statement won't come, or technically it's not possible for that to happen?
Technically it's not possible, plus I don't think there is a space for that to happen in India. Paradiplomacy or cooperative federalism stems from the word cooperative. You cannot have an argumentative stand of the center and the state on this front. So in the international sphere, the overall direction that paradiplomacy takes, or the overall sphere or the form that a certain state or a subnational entity takes, has to come from the center. Be it a constitutional mandate or a limitation that you might say in the Indian context, I think India is doing far more than most other countries in terms of paradiplomacy. Even if we do not have the constitutional mandate, even if foreign policy as a subject comes under the union list, I think there are almost all states who are going out of their way to conduct foreign relations with other countries. That said, we have to keep in mind that India is a country where almost all of the states are border states. So it becomes important for states to maintain their own relations with the neighboring countries. But having said that, it's not in their mandate to go out of their way or beyond what the center might be probing at the central level and doing something which might not be okay with the central government, which might not be in the national interest, so to say. So paradiplomacy in the Indian context, and I think also in the world context, has to be something that sets an example on the national interest, for national interest. Otherwise, you have examples like Catalonia, where something takes such an upsurge that it goes out of hand. That is an embarrassment India should at all costs avoid.
Paradiplomacy, Punjab saw a very interesting example of paradiplomacy. In fact, it may not always be just about the economics. It can also be about a social issue. It can also be about a religious issue. You had Navjot Singh Sidhu go over to Pakistan. He hugged General Qamar Bajwa there. And then something was whispered in his ear about Kartarpur corridor being opened up. He came back and he kind of went all over the media saying Kartarpur corridor is going to be opened up. Talks to open up the corridor had been going on for a very long time. But now that he came out with a declaration that it's going to be opened, it put a different sort of an imperative, it put a different sort of pressure on both the governments. And ultimately, there was a lot of initial noise, there was a lot of turbulence, there was a lot of chaos trying to negotiate through this statement that had been made, and finally the alignments fell in place. And finally, in a way, Kartarpur corridor is happening. A lot of people say that Navjot Singh Sidhu's that comment triggered it. Of course, now you have a lot of stands being taken. No, it was to happen. Things were already on course and everything. But isn't this a strange manifestation of paradiplomacy? Because at that point in time also, repeatedly the question being asked was, who is Navjot Singh Sidhu really as a minister in a state government to be going out and making these kinds of statements? But things happened. So is this a work in progress? Are we also learning along the way as all of these things in a new globalized world happen? Are we also kind of taking our lessons from it? Well, this can happen. Tomorrow something might happen on the Chinese border. Tomorrow something else might happen on the Bangladeshi border. So are we kind of picking up lessons that these kinds of things in a new world might be happening?
So to begin with, I'd say the example that you're quoting is a little, I find it a little inappropriate in the to be applied in this context. I don't think, like you ended that question, I don't think a certain Navjot Singh Sidhu or any other person for that matter has the leeway to be making those sort of comments on the international front. That said, I do not think that the comments that he made on the international front or a certain hug or a handshake drove what the center did about the corridor. I do not think, maybe you could say that he preempted it, but it's definitely not what made the center do what it did. It was not like the center sat and thought, oh my God, this has been done on the national and the international front, and this is making headlines all over the country. Let's do something about it, and let's have the PM or the ex-PM go and inaugurate the corridor. No. I think Navjot Singh Sidhu, in that particular incident, spoke out of turn, where he was not meant to. That said, coming to the example that you also quoted from Bangladesh. Bangladesh, we've seen an embarrassment happen in the past over the Teesta water sharing dispute. India had a dispute with Bangladesh, and the West Bengal government withdrew from that treaty at the last moment. So that is an actual example of paradiplomacy where it actually stalled declarations, where it actually stalled any sort of communication that was happening between two countries. So that is an example. So,
yeah, but I still find it a very interesting example in the manner in which it happened and the manner that it unleashed a certain sequence of actions. That what could have been done to kind of prevent such a thing from it. As I said, there are certain lessons probably that come out of it. This could have ramifications in the future. This could be happening again someplace where instead of an agreement being signed, it is a statement that is thrown. It is an emotive statement, which perhaps is not a statement that needs to be thrown by a government official at that point in time, but it is done. And the Constitution is very clear on where the power will be. But this happens. How does this get resolved? What is the consequence of it?
Again, coming back to it, I think what happened in that incident was not something where that particular minister, Mr. Sidhu, did not have this in mind, oh, if I say this is going to make national headlines. You have to understand that we are in an age of a mega age of globalization and also the digital revolution. Everything that you say is reported. So I think about that incident, it's more than what happened in that incident, it's about how it was reported. Again, I have to impress on it that this does not and should not influence government decisions. The government has a lot more to look at rather than any local comments being made on the border by one politician who rises out of the day, perhaps to maintain goodwill or to rise in the eyes of one nation or another and say, oh, I am championing that we develop ties with Pakistan. I don't think that's how international relations are maintained. It's not one person's doing. It's something everybody has to be a part of. It also has to come from across the border, which we do not see happening. So government decisions cannot be, under any circumstances, be influenced by what a certain politician or a certain entity says, and it's reported more than it should be on social media.
Rami, I'll take that to you. Sao Paulo in Brazil has taken a very different model in the sense that they kind of really run a paradiplomacy project which is at scale. There are 50 kind of embassies, high commissions, embassies that are there in Sao Paulo. Macau has also taken that kind of a route where they kind of initiate their own kind of agreements, they initiate their own kind of treaties or kind of outreach with foreign governments and foreign entities. As AVP of Invest India, what advantages do you see of paradiplomacy in terms of kind of hastening the process of investment, inbound investment into India? Do you see a clear correlation between paradiplomacy moving forward and it actually accelerating inbound investment into India?
Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Good evening. To answer your question, I'm not sure whether we can imitate the example of Sao Paulo or Macau in India because we are completely different dynamics here. But my role at Invest India gives me an opportunity to interact with state governments and state institutions a lot because we are the interface between the foreign investors and the state teams. And I see the states are playing an important role in pushing their agenda forward and not entirely depending on the center. It is not without their contribution that we can drive FDI into the country. We have several investor platforms like mega investor summits happening, like the Progress Punjab. We have a Goa summit that's going to happen pretty soon. So these are platforms where investors get to network, foreign investors get to network with the states directly and build their trust with the country.
In fact, Prime Minister Modi, when he was Chief Minister Modi with Vibrant Gujarat, I mean, he really kind of propelled this whole movement where state chief ministers actually create this kind of an outreach towards NRIs. And
absolutely. And, even the recent visit that PM Modi had made to Vladivostok, roping in CMs, the high ministerial delegation that happened, it was for a purpose, it was to push the state's agenda of building the global value chain of the diamond mining industry there. It was for the purpose of exploring the potential of outward investments in Far East Russia. So these are instances where we see that the states are taking, and the center as well is supporting the states in taking deliberate steps towards building investments in the country and bringing FDI to the country. And that eventually, hopefully, will help us put in holistic foreign policy and will support a more dynamic and ambitious foreign policy put into place. I mean, these are the factors that can contribute to that.
The Ministry of External Affairs, in fact, now is encouraging desks from all states to be present at the Ministry of External Affairs itself to make sure that states kind of can get their word across and kind of get things done.
Right.
But if you had a wish list that you would want in terms of things moving faster, what would you be wanting? Because everybody now wants that things need to start moving faster. Things need to start
This is a foot
in
in the mouth question. We are in...
You won't have Mr. Bukul in audience anytime in the future very soon. So kind of, let him know.
Well, I wish if I were a foreign investor, it's still a very overwhelming experience for investors in India because there are umpteen number of institutions and nodal ministries and under them several other institutions and bodies. And it's quite a overwhelming experience for them. So, I mean, that is what we are trying to solve as well, being an interface and helping them, handhold them into investing in India and making that a smooth experience. So, my wish list would be, I myself get overwhelmed about, the number of institutions that I'll have to interact with in order to get a answer to a query. So if we can bring down the number of institutions that are out there and make it more transparent, make it more easier, and for the investors to come and invest, that would be a wish granted, and make my job much more easier. Thank you.
Ashika, I'll come to you on that. Just about a couple of years back, when Deputy Chief Minister Sukhbir Badal had to go to Poland and Hungary, it was facilitated by the Union government. And after that, just after that, Manohar Lal Khattar, the Chief Minister of Haryana, he went to the US and Canada, facilitated by the Union government. And this was a new initiative of sorts where you had the state chief ministers actually going ahead, going out, and actually creating a certain kind of environment where further on, then when the center kind of gets into the game, it actually manages to kind of lock and seal the deals. So this was a new kind of an outreach that started off. Punjab today is seeking a lot of investment. Invest Punjab is coming up. So when all of this is happening, ultimately it has to start at the level of districts. There is a demand that has to go up. Eventually the supply side has to kick into action. It goes the other way around also. But what is the demand that you see for paradiplomacy in terms of it kind of percolating upwards for the state to take action on it? And thereafter things that need to be handled at a central level for it to kind of then reach the central level. But the ultimate objective is make sure investments come into Punjab.
Absolutely. I think, and that has a lot to do with what Ms. Remya also said in terms of what her wishes are. First thing is to identify that demand. Then to put it into operation, you need to streamline that procedure through which that investor comes through them to us. And the good thing is that the states, thanks to Invest India and such other projects, states are realizing that this particular project is just something that we missed because of this lapse in our ease of doing business. So the fact that the investments are coming whether through center or directly to the states, and the fact that the investors are directly, foreign investors are directly interacting with the state governments are also motivating us to, improve our systems. And besides that, earlier you were talking about the Kartarpur corridor. I would also like to mention that Kartarpur corridor is, in fact, in my view, a poignant example of paradiplomacy. And the reason is that it could be attributed to stray remarks of particular persons, but she's right in saying that such big projects don't happen on stray remarks. There is obviously a lot of correspondence, a lot of work that went behind the Kartarpur corridor coming into operation now. And the role that this state government has particularly played is the fact that the political consensus was there on both sides of Punjab. But it was not, it did not hold so much weightage at the central level in both the countries, because after all, the Punjabi population holds more worth here in the state of Punjab and there in the state of Punjab. And that's why it got a lot of currency immediately, and things started moving. Also, we were fortunate that this occasion of the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev Ji was arriving, and that also gave a lot of expedition to this whole process. So I feel that, of course, the state government and the central government have to be in sync. But if something matters more to a particular state government, then its interaction via paradiplomatic channels to international investors or international governments will definitely give a boost.
No, it's a big country, 1.3 billion people at the end of the day, with a limited foreign service, with a limited Ministry of External Affairs, and with a lot of kind of pressure in terms of the new demands that are coming in from the states as the economy kind of picks up pace. So the pressure is going to only mount. So solutions will come. Yes, solutions are already being devised. They will come at a certain point in time. But as an IAS officer in the state of Punjab, Do you feel that there is something that you would need happening faster, better, for you to be able to bring in investment that you would want, because Punjab is trying to bring in a lot of investment? Do you want certain kind of policy decisions to take place faster? In any case, when we talk about the fact that foreign policy is with the Ministry of External Affairs, in terms of bringing in investment, it's not really a hindrance. Where is the hindrance then? Why are we even talking about paradiplomacy? Nobody's stopping investment from taking place. Nobody's talking about new kind of trade relations being formed. Where is the issue?
See, like you yourself mentioned, the fact of the matter is the diversity of the country. The issues that Punjab government has on its agenda right now might not be true even for a state which is adjacent, for example, Haryana. Now, Punjab entered or is in process of entering an agreement with Israel on water conservation, drip irrigation, etc. That might not be top of the agenda for Haryana. That's why you need that kind of demand identification, issue identification, and then, of course, its pursuit. Besides that, also, I feel as an administrator in the government of Punjab, one thing that will obviously drive our investment is going to be ease of doing business. Whether it is regulatory approvals, making things more transparent, whether it is, yesterday we were discussing things like joint inspections. But the reality on the ground is that I have 22 departments operating, and that's just an approximate number, probably even more, operating in the district, really. And my objective is to have all these departments do their inspections on a particular day, jointly. Of course, it's going to facilitate an entrepreneur, because obviously all the transaction costs, everything else in terms of time and money, a lot of it is saved. But to bring these 22 people together on one day to go in the presence of 100 other externalities, Pollution Control Board is not just doing its pollution checking, it is also checking stubble burning, it is also checking vehicular pollution, it is doing 100 other things, and apart from all the staff constraints as well. It is a little bit time taking, but let me assure you, we are on the job.
All right. Mr. Mukul, I'll come back to you. We'll take another quick round of questions, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. A certain amount of continuity of policy has also got to be made. In a country where we have Lok Sabha elections in a particular cycle, and then the state elections happening at a different cycle. So when you have, and you do not know which government is going to come to power where. So when you have this out of sync kind of governments coming and going, how does this continuity of policy, continuity of diplomatic relations, and then this whole paradiplomatic approach kind of fall in place? Can something be done about it? Is this a sort of a challenge that would be there? Is it there? Can something be done about it?
No, absolutely. I think we need to look at the cooperation between center and states in our country has been exemplary. There are very few countries, particularly federal ones, which can give, you yourself gave the example of whatever, California, etc. The point is, take the last week, a mega event of the dimension or of the magnitude of Chennai Connect could be possible only because the central government and the state government were working together. I have it from the chief of protocol, my chief of protocol, that the excellent work that was also done by the government of Tamil Nadu. Now, this will not be in the public domain. It's not normally spoken. Each of these big events, and now of course we are seeing that many of the big events are also moving out of Delhi. So the idea is to take them to various states. So, but what we should be clear is para-diplomacy is important. It's getting more important by the day. It will continue to get important. But I think to believe that para-diplomacy is a panacea for all problems, I think that would be a bit. That is why when you come, it is a good facilitation, promotion role it plays, because now Chennai, Tamil Nadu, whatever, Mahabalipuram have got that kind of, they got that brand kind of thing. But to say that everything, it has sorted out all the issues of ease of doing business and all, that's not true. So we should also understand the limitations of this. While it is a very important element. It will continue and become more important, but it's not going to, it's not a solution, it's not a magic wand that all our problems will be sorted by paradiplomacy. There are hundreds, literally, of small and big cooperations which are happening all the time. It's not just now. Chief ministers have been leading delegations for years and decades. It's just that the frequency is becoming they're becoming more frequent. The frequency is increasing. Their potential is increasing. The dimension, the size, and the results. So I think we should understand this in perspective. The other point I'd like to make is that our para-diplomacy model is really today being, I was at the IFTD, the International Forum for Diplomatic Academies, which had this last year in Washington. And our para-diplomacy model is actually being looked at as one of the model ways. I'm not saying that everything is hunky-dory, perfect. Obviously, there's scope for improvement. But I think it is being looked at today internationally also as a tremendously successful model.
If you had to define that model in like a couple of lines, what is that model?
Cooperative federalism, and the center and the state working in harmony for common goal, whether it's promotion of trade, investment, it's promotion of tourism, it's on the diaspora side, providing welfare measures or protection of our diaspora abroad, whatever be or it's just pure culture, projection of our culture and soft power, which we were discussing in the last panel. I think the center and the state are working. There will obviously be, from time to time, issues, but I think they are working together. And all these measures which are being put forward, including the Videsh Bhavan idea, which is a very nascent idea, and it'll develop as we go forward. I think the idea is the objective is that we are all on the same wavelength.
Falguni, you just heard Mr. Mukul, there's a lot of action that is taking place. You have delved into the issue in depth. There are several publications that you have kind of already made. And in fact, the Canadian thinker, the one who coined the word paradiplomacy. Yes. So there was another, the Canadian, what's his name?
Kincaid.
Okay. So it was also mentioned there that in fact paradiplomacy also is born out of a certain crisis. The mic again.
I think it's something about me.
I think you again picked up the mic which was not functioning. This was the mic that was functioning. Acha, okay.
It's about me.
All right. Yeah, that in fact paradiplomacy is a certain kind of, is born out of a certain crisis in terms of the huge amount of demand that is now being put onto it, in terms of things moving. So like Mr. Mukul was saying that it's a model that is being spoken about. Since you have delved into it, do you think it is at pace? Is there more pace that needs to be put into it? Because the demand for it is only increasing. Is the delivery happening at pace? Or is there something that you see as a mismatch there and something that needs to be done there? Is the other mic there?
Is that?
Yeah, that's one.
It's working.
Okay, all right.
You did something. I forgot. I'm sorry.
No, I was asking you, is the whole process of being able to take paradiplomatic measures happening at pace? Or is there some sort of a mismatch there in terms of the huge demand that is there now? States want to reach out. States want to kind of engage with countries all across. Globalization has picked up pace. There has been a temporary kind of slowdown there, but it is again going to pick up pace. So in such a circumstance, are things moving at pace, or are you seeing a certain sort of mismatch there?
See, there are two things to be kept in mind here. When it comes to India, there is not just one political party at play here. There are a lot of regional parties which are at play, and often what happens is that the government in the center is different from the government at the states, in the states. So there is bound to be a difference of opinion or a difference of policy making when it comes to paradiplomacy or in terms of foreign policy. But we have to understand that as a geographical entity, states exist, and it's not the center that exists. Any policy that the center makes at its own level will definitely and is bound to affect the states. Therefore, it's important to make policies that are in tandem between the center and states. talking about the pace, I think as an analyst, I think I agree with Ambassador Mukul that India is doing far more than most other countries in terms of the scale at which paradiplomacy is being pursued in India. As for the success rate, as for the investments coming in, I think Ms. Ramya would be a better person to comment on that since she comes from an agency like Invest India, which is seeing something on a daily basis. But as for the pace and as for the international engagements that we are seeing, I think India is definitely a success model in terms of paradiplomatic relations.
Ramya, I'll in fact toss that to you. Diplomacy per se is somewhere where there is a certain kind of a clash of interests, and you have to kind of find the middle ground. So that is what you're trying to do in diplomacy. When we talk about paradiplomacy, it is transfer of diplomacy from the sovereign state actor to other players along to whom it can be divested. But in terms of any kind of paradiplomacy that we have been talking about, if it begins at a corporate level, it begins at a business level, it engages at a business level, and then it moves upwards in terms of demands that are there. And ultimately, there are ideologies that fall into place. Ultimately, there are state alignments that fall into place. So when it moves up from the demand side itself, you represent Invest India, you represent agencies that would want investment to come in. And when you see a certain conflict that takes place with an ideology at a certain level, how does that get resolved in this entire process? Because business coming in is a pure economic activity where you are going to kind of treat it as an economic activity. But if it has to be implemented at a certain stage, if there is an ideological limitation to it, what I mean, for example, take the instance of Pakistan itself. You can today open up trade from across the Wagah border. But if you do not want to open it up for certain ideological reasons or whatever state reasons, and the demand is there from both the sides, at what point does a sink get formed there? At what point does the economic cost of holding on to an ideology kind of get factored in? I mean, it's a slightly complex question, but in the sense that if you want to hold a particular ideology, there has to be some kind of a measurement against the economic benefit of letting go of it. And if there is a demand for it, how does this happen?
From the few months that I've worked with Invest India and my interactions with investments and investment climate generally and investors, I don't think India is at a stage where it has the liberty to hold on to its ideologies and enforce that on making investment decisions. And I don't think that comes into play. I've had several interactions with state governments. We don't have any generally clash in ideologies when it comes to, driving or plowing investments into the country. We are generally forthcoming, and we are looking forward to having people invest in India more. And it's a very friendly investment climate. Yes, there is a vast amount of bureaucracy or regulatory framework that one has to navigate in order to get things done. That is the ground reality. But in terms of accepting investments from different countries with different ideologies, I don't think I don't see there is any clash as such. I don't know if I've answered your question
right. So Ashika, last, I'll come to you before we open up for questions. One is clearly seeing that even for governments to kind of hold on to any kind of a position is becoming increasingly difficult in the sense that there is a huge amount of demand for progress and development. What has your experience been in the state of Punjab in terms of bringing in investment, in terms of taking things forward? You can use this mic.
Thank you. See, you're right there, and at the same time, I would disagree with what Ms. Ramya just said in terms of ignoring any ideology, because eventually we are a democratic setup, and there is the federalism as well, and there are ideologies from the mohalla to the city to the state and then the central level. Besides that, there are concerns. There are real concerns. For example, so far as Wagah border is concerned, there is the concern of security. Any incident happens tomorrow and it falls on the government eventually. Everybody is running behind the government to say, what are you doing? Despite all the budget that goes into defense, etc. So you cannot ignore the ideology. And At the same time, you are right in saying that people are gradually beginning to realize, and that's the progress that we are also running behind, that people are beginning to realize that economy precedes anything else. Economy precedes religion, economy precedes your cultural beliefs, your all other aspects, and gradually things are going to fall in that line, and political will for that economic development is going to gather more momentum as and when our population matures into believing that eventually it is the economy that's going to drive development and nothing else.
So we'll take a few questions quickly and then wrap up in the next 10 minutes. Yes, a question from there. You can try speaking if we can hear you or not.
My name is Harsh and I'm studying international business at Punjab University. So my question is about, so ever since the aftermath of Brexit and we see the international scenario is becoming very uncertain. So you don't see, there is no policy certainty because you see governments becoming more protectionist stances on many issues. So how does, in such a uncertain environment, India assess its engagements in the international scene? How does it adjust or makes its path forward? So there are because now we see that the Chinese president is was acting as a the champion of global trade and World Economic Forum. So in such a scenario, when you see the world seems to have been upside down, the tables have turned. So how does India make its its engagement in such a scenario? That's my question.
Mr. Mukul, would you like to address it?
Well, I think the bottom line always is the national interest. And India, I think we have had very consistent policies. I don't think we can think of any U-turns in our policies. Yes, there will be continuity, but there will always be change in terms of adapting or reacting or factoring in what you mentioned, different challenges which are posed by the international environment. I think a good example was the 2008 economic and financial crisis. We engaged very actively with the G20 at that stage, for example, to address those challenges. So I'm sure the government and all concerned are seized of the matter, and they will take. But bottom line is always national interest.
Right. Any other question? Yeah. Okay. There's a question there. A couple of questions there.
A very good evening. My name is Tanya, and I am pursuing BBA in Kara University. My question is, how could actually local government can actually foster SDGs implementation through direct international cooperation or paradiplomacy? How could paradiplomacy help to do that?
I think. Yeah. Okay. You can take that question. Yeah.
See, as of today, where we stand, like it found mention in the earlier discussion also, city level administration is not so evolved in the country as of today. Municipal administration has been better off in the Western India still. For instance, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka are slightly better off, but one cannot really imagine city level diplomacy, whether for sustainable development goals or for anything else, in the rest of the country, UTs being exceptions. So I think a lot of work first has to happen in improving our own municipal systems before really looking outside for any sort of cooperation. Thank you.
There was other questions, right?
I'm from Punjab University. So in the context of cooperative federalism and also in the Indian constitutional mandate, which is firmly in unitary bias, we've always seen Planning Commission being very active. I'm a little curious about Niti Aayog's role, which seems to have kind of moved into the background of late. So it's just a curiosity in that.
Would you like to take it? Can I take that?
Yeah.
I think now that you've mentioned an institution, it's important to understand that there are institutions already in place. At this point, there is a need to strengthen the existing mechanisms that are in place. For example, there is the National Development Council, there are interstate councils that exist, which can be made more effective through regular interactions and engagements. Speaking of the Niti Aayog, in my knowledge, I think the Niti Aayog is doing commendable work on cooperative federalism. It's just that it might not have been reported so much as you rightly said, but it's not that the Niti Aayog is not taking this into consideration and is not bringing the states to the fore. In fact, the Niti Aayog under this government has now actually become a huge mechanism where states actually get to be at the forefront and also voice their opinions and their needs for the central government to then take on those issues and then work them further.
So it's just that it's not being reported enough, as you said.
To some extent, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The last few questions. Okay. See. All right.
Good evening. My name is Shivansh and I am from Chandigarh University. A few days ago, Arvind Kejriwal was invited to Copenhagen for a climate summit, but the center refused to let him go. So, and we all know that BJP is at the center, and we have a few states that do not have a BJP government. So, how does a successful paradiplomatic function work with the different governments at the state level and at the center level?
Well, every proposal is examined on its merits, and as we have already discussed, a large number of chief ministers are going. I am not aware of the specific case that you mentioned, since I don't deal with it, but really the Prime Minister has been carrying the chief ministers as part of his outreach to various parts. There are chief ministers going in standalone delegations. So I don't think you can point out. There must have been reasons if what you say is correct. I have no idea. I am not privy to that.
In light of the definition of paradiplomacy, it does not talk only about the state government, but also about industries and private players and NGOs. And also, while talking about foreign investments, we don't not only talk about bringing in investments, but then maintaining a sustainable business solution. So, sir, in light of this, my question is that, when the foreign services faces a shortage, when the Indian administrators are burdened with examples such as 22 departments, don't you think it would make far more sense to empower the industries or the industrial clusters or industrial associations to directly fetch in through the Ministry of External Affairs to go abroad and fetch investments and thereafter maintain sustainable, business relations where they're empowered, which would cut in a lot of gangplank and also improve the pace?
There is no restriction on business or, for that matter, any other sectors which you mentioned, any other areas from seeking foreign investment. In fact, in every official delegation, major delegation, whether it's the President of India or the Prime Minister or others, ministers, there are business delegations all the time accompanying. So, and they can also go on their own. So there's no restriction. Yes, if your point is more should be done, perhaps yes, but the fact is that there is no restriction on anybody. After all, the business, the civil society, and all other sectors of the society and the country should be actually engaged. Yes, I agree fully. It's not just the government's job. Government is doing what it has to do, but I think, and as I said, perhaps it can do more, but certainly it's for everybody else to also sort of chip in. And I don't think in this age and era we should be again looking only towards the government. So that I think is well understood these days. That there is no. I mean, we are in a free country, and any number of business delegations, chambers, others, states are moving out.
Yeah, last question. Okay, he's already got a mic, so you will get the last question, don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, respected panelists. My question is that since Ambassador, you stated that the ministry is trying to increase its outreach towards the state governments, that also opens up the foreign policy and international relations to the vulnerabilities of politics at the level of state governments. So how does the ministry draw the line that, okay, these are the issues which the state governments can handle and these are the government that the state government should not touch?
No, I think we should get this clear. Foreign policy and diplomacy are squarely, as was pointed out, in the domain of the central government. The central government, by way of outreach, is engaging all stakeholders. Others, even at the center, outside the Ministry of External Affairs, we are trying to engage as many stakeholders in any issue. Ultimately, yes, the final decision rests with the center in terms of, so you don't obviously agree to everything which everybody is saying. That's not practical. But yes, consulting them, engaging with them, getting the views of the stakeholders, any number of such exercises are ongoing with regard to almost all aspects all the time.
Also, Jyoti, if I may add to Ambassador Mukul's points, you see, there cannot be a policy decision made before something is actually happening on the ground. You cannot say, okay, these are the matters that we will let states take a decision on. Paradiplomacy is a relatively new concept that is being acknowledged in the government now. As Ambassador Mukul started off with his address, he said that, of course, paradiplomacy is something that has existed for years. While that is true, the acknowledgement of it is a fairly new deal. So now it's not the time when you say, okay, this is a certain area that a state will deal with. If something comes up, it's not on the center. Paradiplomacy is about devolution of powers, devolution of foreign policy power, foreign policy to be conducted at that. So it's something that will come up with time. And of course, there will be challenges because, as I said, there are regional parties in existence. So there will be challenges that will come up on perhaps even a day-to-day basis. But that is for the governments to then figure out. It's not something that you can pre-plan and then step into. That's my input on that.
Right. Okay, the last question. I think we'll have to take your questions later on, okay? So we'll end with this last question.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ajay Kumar from CEC College, Mohali. My question is, why there is, as you've discussed about the Punjab state, so my question is, why there is less opportunity to the youth in Punjab state as compared to others like Chennai, Bangalore and all, related to employment? There is always less opportunity in Punjab as compared to other states. And what government is doing to improve all this?
See, if one were to go down the trajectory of development that Punjab state has really taken, in the 70s it was mostly Green Revolution, and this state really popped into action on the basis of the Green Revolution. So industry had really taken a backseat until about the 90s, and only gradually did it come into cognizance that the state cannot, as of today, piggy bank on that growth that happened on the basis of agriculture. So that gap did happen, and because of that, we might have been delayed in identifying newer opportunities for the youth. Besides that, also Punjab has suffered, as we all know, a massive migration of our educated youth, our skilled youth, because of which also the deficit today is is massively of skilled manpower. The issue is not of unskilled labor. In fact, we are major absorbents of unskilled labor from states like UP and Bihar and West Bengal. But now, as of today, the issue is driving in more investment, which we are now doing, training our youth into becoming that sort of, into having that sort of skill set which can be absorbed in the industry, and that is the way forward.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, so, well, this conference was called the Young Thinkers Conference. The idea here is that you start thinking, you kind of think about things, and actually you are seeing the world in progress. Things are on the move, things are happening. It's a physics concept. Inertia, something which is moving takes energy to stop, something which is static takes energy to start, and that's what happens in almost everything in life. Things need effort to be started, things need effort to be realigned, turned, and you're seeing the world change. And there are a lot of contradictory pulls and pressures in the world of today. The rise of the individual, borderless states, artificial intelligence, globalization, anti-globalization, all sorts of things happening. And that's why you have the powerful brains that are here thinking about it, trying to figure out how do we kind of negotiate our way through this maze. Thank you so much, Ramya. Thank you so much, Falguni. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And thank you so much, Ashika. And thank you so much to the British Deputy High Commission and the Indian School of Business for making this thinking possible. Thank you so much.